A promise. A commitment to something or someone. Remember our promise. Signalis is a survival horror game crafted by Rose Engine, a team of only 2 developers. And remember that this game was made by just 2 people. It released in 2022 to nothing but positive reviews, with most being near perfect scores. But still, regardless of that, Signalis remains rather niche. The closest thing I could compare it to, as many do, is Silent Hill. But even then, Signalis does more than enough to prove itself as its own great entry to the genre, one everyone should experience. Featuring elements of cosmic horror, a sad and tragic love story, and one of my favorite survival horror experiences ever, Signalis has probably become my favorite game I've played this year. And that brings us to now, where you're either still here because you love Signalis, or you're interested enough in Signalis to hear me talk all about it. So please enjoy the video as I go through Signalis piece by piece and kinda take a shot at breaking it down, with the goal of making you love this game just as much as I do. Of course, spoilers, big spoiler alert for the whole game, but even then, if you don't mind spoilers and haven't played the game, I really recommend it. Signalis is one of those games I describe as an experience, one that everyone walks away differently from, and therefore everyone should try it on their own time. And with that, let's just get into it. Please enjoy the video. Signalis begins with you, Elster, waking up from what appears to be a long sleep, and immediately things are unsettling. The ship is in some sort of distress. Lights are flashing, it's dark, but most of all, it's quiet. And so you're stuck wandering around the ship looking for an objective. In doing so, you find many things: a picture with a white-haired girl, a bloody note mentioning your name, and in another pod, a bloody broken keycard. Using that keycard, you can finally step outside. And as you watch Elster climb out of the ship and into the snow, music starts to play. For the first time, we hear the soundtrack, and the result is uncomfortable, as for the last 10 minutes or so, it's been completely quiet. Elster then finds herself in a hole with no choice but to climb deeper in due to the cold. She finds herself in a weird room, and in the room, a weird book. And once you interact with the book, the radio turns on, playing an eerie, creepy signal that kicks off a cutscene. A cutscene telling Elster to remember her promise. This cutscene signals the end of the prologue as well as the beginning of the real game. And wow, what an opening. That cutscene was the very thing that had me hooked and would cause me to binge this entire game and eventually just go insane diving into its questions. What is the promise? Who is that white-haired girl? And most of all, what is even going on with the world, with this photo? It's changed. And what happened to Elster? Her face literally melted. For now, we don't have the answers, but we can talk about this facility, our first real gameplay section. Here we get a good feel of Signalis and understand a little bit of why it's mentioned next to Silent Hill. While obviously the gameplay is somewhat similar, a lot of Signalis' random quirks are also pretty close to it. Yeah. One other thing to mention is save rooms. While a survival horror staple, Signalis' save object heavily reminds me of Silent Hill. It also makes me feel terrified if I don't save often. And when it comes to the actual gameplay, Signalis is your standard survival horror. Resources are sacred, so be careful with them. Objects can be combined, so make sure to inspect them. And most of all, you gotta have zombies. Mutated zombies. These creature things. I don't know if they're zombies. But yeah, now in this facility, Elster begins her search for the woman in the picture. And after an encounter with the Star unit, she believes this woman could be in the facility's mine. In order to get there though, we need a keycard. To get the keycard, well, puzzles. I won't go over the puzzles, but I will say Signalis uses tons of notes, posters, pictures, books. Anything that can have info to not only help solve the puzzles, but to give you tons of insight into the story and world of the game. Basically, it's really important to pay attention. You need to pay a lot of attention. And through paying attention, we get to advance to a radio tower? Upon picking up a mysterious stone, we seem to see some kind of memory. One told in first person this time, which is something really cool Signalis does, switching back and forth between third and first person constantly. Here we get the radio, something that becomes essential to figuring out the game's puzzles and tons of its secrets. From there we continue to see glimpses of the white-haired woman, and after beating a boss we come face to face with Adler. Someone the notes have continued to mention. Elster asks about the woman she's seeking, and Adler reveals her name, Alana Seo, before pushing Elster down the elevator shaft. And after another weird flashback memory thing, Elster awakens and continues their mission, giving the player no answers and if anything, just more questions. From this point forward, we continue to see glimpses of a girl named Issa, who is on a search much like our own for her own sister. After she's approached by Adler, she's chased into the mines, where he seems to be almost hunting her. Meanwhile, it's almost like Elster is unintentionally following them, heading into the mines, eventually finding a deep hole. And with no other options, she's left to just jump in. We now find ourselves on an ambient, eerie beach with nothing in sight. And after wandering down the shore, you find the same exact book from the beginning. When you do finally find it, because it took me like 3 minutes, you interact with it. Almost as if you were in a dream, you wake up in what seems to be the real bottom of the hole. This place can only be described as hell. Everything is run down, nasty, distorted. The notes are bloody, ripped, missing words, and the area is covered in flesh? But Elster doesn't care. Elster continues, trekking through hell to fulfill this promise. We eventually catch up with Issa, who's being attacked by that. Yeah, I really don't know either. It's just ew. And upon beating whatever that is, we save Issa, who can continue on her own journey as we continue on ours, eventually finding our way out of this hell. As we climb the staircase out, we find Adler in front of some sort of gateway, talking about his commander Falk. He thinks on how she changed after crossing some kind of threshold, expressing this to Elster. But Elster isn't really listening. That doesn't matter to her. Elster must continue no matter what. She treks beyond the gate and through this barren, red landscape until she comes across the ship. Elster climbs the ship, taking every ounce of power she has to make it inside. But even with that, she fails. And that's the end of Signalis. 9. If someone actually fell for that and quit the game right here, I feel terrible for you. I'm so sorry for your loss. But yeah, it seems like we got the bad ending, and so we have no choice but to try again. Wait. This is different. Yeah, Signalis tries to get you with a fake ending, but in reality, if you click play, you continue forward. But you're not really forward, if that makes sense. Well, at least you got a cute hat. Anyways, right away you notice that this is the ship the game started in, but then you notice it's nowhere close to that state. And as you explore this healthy version of the ship, you eventually run into this cutscene. God, my heart. They're so cute. This game, man. I can't believe it. But Elster seems to have remembered who she's really looking for, and so she repairs herself, ready to make her way to the final point of her journey, Rotfront. Rotfront itself isn't the scariest area in the game, but I think it becomes one of the most uncomfortable as you notice all the details. Not only in-game with the area changing as you progress, but as you read more and more of the notes in the area. We also learn a lot here. Things like who Lania was, how Ariane grew up, and so much about the world of Signalis as a whole. And soon enough, you run into Issa for the last time, clearly hurt and in a state of disarray. She says she's looked everywhere, but she just can't find her. And as she reaches out to Elster, she falls apart, dying. Eventually, after solving the area's big puzzle, Elster finds herself crawling through a hole just like the one from the beginning of the game, ending up in the same exact room. As you pick up the book and leave the room, it's evident that this is the end. This is the final step for Elster, and all that's in the way is Falk. As Falk wakes up, she makes clear mentions of the memories we've seen, implying she knows of them just as we do. But rather than letting us continue on, she wants to stop us for some reason. Elster quickly defeats her, as at this point there's nothing that can stop her, and she reaches the gateway once more. Adler stands in her way here yet again, this time actually serious about stopping her, implying that if she completes this quest she's on, the whole world will fall apart. Elster doesn't listen, and just like before, nothing can stop her, and so she pushes on, shooting Adler. And so, just like before, she treks through the red landscape, reaching the same ship yet again. But this time, there's no fake ending. Elster gets into the ship, and this time it seems to be the real ship. The ship is all but fallen apart. It's in disrepair, trashed, and filled with bloody torn notes. But Elster continues into the final room. This room is dark and dimly lit by a pod that seems to be in an unusable state. Yet there's someone inside. It's Ariane, and Elster finally approaches her, finally there to fulfill their promise. And that's Signalis, at least one of its endings. This one's implied to be a good ending, where Elster fulfills their promise. You get this ending by being slow, basically. You take way too long to play through the game, you kill a bunch of enemies, you overly explore, and you die a bunch of times in the process. And that's 1 out of 4 endings if you don't count the fake out one, and yet again, if you fell for that, what are you doing? But the other endings are the leave ending, memory ending, and the artifact ending. Starting with the leave ending, well, it's exactly what it sounds like. Elster leaves the ship before fulfilling the promise and soon dies. implying this wants to be seen as a bad ending. This ending is a bit more specific to get, wanting you to kill as little as possible while checking as many things as you can. Notes, doors, things like that. Next up, the memory ending is perhaps the saddest ending in my opinion. Having Elster complete the journey and finally find Ariane for her to forget all about Elster, as we watch Elster die at her side. Obviously, this seems to be a bad ending. Imagine going through this whole journey for someone you love, just for them to forget about you at the very end of it. To get this ending, you have to speedrun the game as fast as possible, missing most things and focusing only on the objectives. And the last ending, the artifact ending, is probably the creepiest ending out of the bunch. It's also a secret ending, being the only ending you can't get in a first playthrough. After you've beat the game once, you can play again, obviously, but this time you can find 3 secret keys. With those keys, you will be able to open the safe just before the Falk final boss. In that safe, you'll find a lily, and once picking it up, you see a lily on a pole surrounded by 6 dead Elsters, then revealing the artifact and a giant eye looking down on it all. But that's not it. After you've witnessed one of the weirdest things yet, and before the credits play, we see Elster and Ariane in one last dance. I think you can consider any ending to be the true ending. Bad ending, good, it's all completely up to you and how you interpreted the game. We can clearly see many Elster units have gone on this quest at many points in this game, and therefore if you really want to think about it, I think it's pretty fair to say these are all fates these units have seen before. This leads me to my favorite part of Signalis, how everything is purposely left open-ended. While yes, there is a story, there's also plenty of puzzle pieces missing that they do want people to think about. Many of the game's biggest questions don't have definitive answers, but they have enough clues for you to create the answers if you wish to dive in and do so. And I love that. The creators wanted there to be tons of ways people could look at every single little thing and make their own interpretations, like with the endings. For players like me who love to do just that, this game is perfect. And that's why I really recommend everyone to play this game for themselves. It's the type of game where it's really about forming your own interpretations. It's also $20 and goes on sale often. You have no excuse to not play it. And that brings us to now. It's time for me to give you my explanation of what happens in the world of Signalis. This is just what I picked up from the game. Obviously, as I said, I think there's many ways to explain the events that happen in game and tons of theories you can make. But this is my take on the main points. Main points, by the way. I actually cannot explain every single detail I noticed. And I want to keep it brief, so we're going to keep it as short as possible, not going over every single bit of the game. It all begins with Ariane, who spent most of her early life on Rotfront, not really feeling like she fit in. This led her to Penrose, a military program she signed up for in hope that it would make things better. And at first, it did. As part of the program, Ariane was shipped off into space to look for anything you would look for in space. Worlds, life, you get it. Alongside a singular Elster unit. Things were basically perfect for Ariane at this point. No longer did she have to worry about people, something she struggled with. She had all the time in the world for her hobbies, and she was doing a relatively simple job maintaining the ship. It was nothing short of great, until it wasn't. 3,000 days plus on a small ship would break anybody, and eventually it seemed like she was just going to die on the ship. It became increasingly obvious that she had basically been abandoned in space, and those 3,000 days turned into 4,000 and eventually 5,000. So with nothing else to do and the fact that she could slowly feel herself breaking, she sparked up a friendship with the Elster unit. The two of them became super close, and became closer and closer as things got worse and worse. The ship had begun to fail, they were probably running out of resources, and Ariane began to get sick. So considering how obviously dire everything was getting, they made the promise. The two of them made their promise and Ariane locked herself in the pod we find her in. This was probably the best case scenario at the time. Elster could watch her and make sure nothing went wrong and that she was all okay, but that couldn't last forever. Even a robot doesn't last forever, and Elster eventually broke down, leaving Ariane trapped in the pod. Here's where I have to mention something about Ariane. Ariane is bioresonant. Now, I can't fully explain that as a concept as it's extremely complicated and I don't have the words. But if I was to explain it, it's like this. Basically, she's stuck in this pod, dying slowly and semi-asleep. But she's dreaming. You dream when you're asleep. And because she's bioresonant, this dream is being broadcasted almost just like a radio wave. This radio wave is her dream. So think of dreams in general. If she's obviously in pain she can't escape from, like being locked in a pod, she's going to dream of Elster, and more specifically, their promise. That means this radio wave is going to hit all these Elster units, a mass-produced being, because she's bioresonant. And it causes them to all boot up and attempt to go fulfill this promise they're seeing through her dream. I really hope you got that. But from this idea, you can explain the game pretty easily and take so many different routes. You're obviously playing as an Elster that throughout the game is working to remember and fulfill that promise they're remembering all of a sudden. And so you have that, and you know how the promise was led to being created. You know how Ariane, Elster, made the promise, and now we're here. But where does it all take place? That's another really big question. It's also another question that's completely up to you. There's several different places and ideas I think you could say. You could say maybe it's all in Elster's mind. After all, we are playing as Elster the whole game, trying to remember something that Elster should know. Or you could say the same for Ariane's mind. Considering she is the one dreaming, maybe you could say something like she's hoping to wake up from the painful dream. Dreaming about everything she's lived and hoping Elster, someone she loved very much, will do something about it. My favorite idea though, and the one I personally subscribe to, is that the dream has managed to almost create a separate plane to travel through. Basically the idea that this whole thing is real. It actually happens. To begin, it all starts with Ariane's signal, something we've already went over. And imagining that it's a signal, it needs to hit something. And so it hits Falk in the mining facility. I think we can obviously assume Falk is bioresonant too because of her words at the very end of the game, in her boss fight. Falk speaks just like she's receiving the same signal we are, but she doesn't understand it because it's not for her. We're given so many moments that explain how this signal affected Falk. Most prominently, Adler explaining how she changed when she went through the threshold, or maybe when she interpreted the signal. She started seeing things that she couldn't understand, but she somewhat knew what they were. And so you have this robot that does understand it, something that's consuming her mind. She gets angry, she gets jealous, and who does she take it out on? That robot that keeps getting up over and over again. That's why she wants to fight us at the very end of the game. So back on track, Signal hits Falk, causing them to clash and create this plane. While thinking of that idea, notice how when Elster drops down the hole in the mining facility, it kind of feels like she's dropped into another place completely, or a place created by Ariane's dream. This place is super distorted, with all the details leading to someone who is very sick but can't do nothing about it. Weird mutated creatures, messes everywhere, and gross sickly flesh taking over everything. That sounds like Ariane. Someone who is stuck in a pod, growing older and sicker every day, pushing this onto a dream she's creating. With this and everything in mind, we can lay out the game pretty easily. Elster wakes up because of the signal, pretty confused, but she's on the right track, and so she starts to explore, eventually finding her way into the hole in this dreamlike area. She explores this plane trying to remember everything and reaches the gateway, something that I think seems to mark the crossing point between the facility and the ship, like the middle point. At this point though, she doesn't really remember and she fails. This leads to the false ending. We know Elster isn't done yet though, as she leaves the dream plane, entering the real ship, and repairs herself, but sees Ariane as a blob of flesh. This is something that confuses me a little bit, and I think is still pretty confusing, but if I were to explain it, I would say that maybe Elster doesn't remember Ariane yet. I say this because it's a fleshy blob, something I assume is being used to represent Ariane's state in like the real ship. And therefore she doesn't remember Ariane, but the sickness, all of that around it, she just sees the sickness. So she journeys backwards into the dream world and the Rotfront, assembling the final pieces of her memory, Ariane, everything, and defeats Falk. From there on, it's the endings, and as I said before, I think each ending is your own interpretation. I personally got the promise ending, where we do see them fulfill their promise, which I think the promise you can also assume whatever you think it is, but I think from this it's easy to assume it's them leaving together. And so I think that's the perfect note to leave this tragic love story at. But regardless of what you think goes on in Signalis, what ending you think is the true ending, who is doing what, anything, we do all end up arriving to the same question. What does it all mean? And my answer to that is nothing. Well, not really nothing, but nothing as in nothing specific. You could say it's meant to tell a simple idea like the horrors of moving on, or you can take a bit more of a philosophical approach, saying it's a message about repetitiveness nowadays, contrasting the loop we see in the game to like social media. I don't know, random examples. Point is, either would be correct to you. Maybe not correct to me, but both work well. I'll say it again. Signalis is a game all about interpretation, and that's what I love so much about it. I'm someone who loves indirect storytelling. I love having to look through the games. I love having to notice all the tiny details and read absolutely everything there is to offer, all just to find the answers in the story. Not only does this give me absolutely everything I need for the game to love it, but a personal story to go along with my experience. Something that makes every game I look at in this way so memorable. Combine that with it being survival horror, probably my favorite genre of game to play, and the sad, tragic, but hopeful love story the game tells, and Signalis meets all of my personal requirements for a perfect game. And if we come off of that, I truly understand all of the Silent Hill comparisons. It's not even just the gameplay, but also the way the storytelling is handled. Still, after a deep dive into everything this game has, Signalis does more than enough to prove itself as something unique and most of all, beautiful. More than even that though, it proves itself as an experience everyone should try no matter what. And with that, all that's left to say is that I really hope you've fallen in love with Signalis in the same way I have. It's truly a beautiful experience. I can't say that anymore. And perfect, add that to the list. It's all of it in the package of some frightening survival horror. Thank you for watching, and I can't thank the two devs, Rose Engine, who worked on this game enough. It's such a beautiful product, and every time I hear that it was just two people, it's just insane. Thank you. Hello, me again. Just wanted to do a quick outro to say a couple of random few things. First, let me know what you think. If you are really into Signalis, I'd love to hear your takes on the game in general, especially tons of what you think goes on during the game. I also just want to say shout out to my brothers Retro and Zai for getting me on this game in the first place. They've been telling me that I would absolutely love it since they've played it forever ago, and I finally decided I'd listen. Why not? And well, this video exists, so obviously they were right. Thank you guys. And last, thank you everyone who is still here. Let me know what you think in the comments. I already said that. I love reading comments. And as always, thank you so much for the support recently. It's amazing. Mwah.